I will also point out that the discussion about the urgency of protecting the safety of judges. Listen, I agree. We should protect the safety of every federal judge, but it is interesting because my Democrat colleagues were utterly silent during 4 years of the Biden administration when you had violent mobs outside the homes of Supreme Court justices unhappy with the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs, and the Biden Justice Department refused to enforce federal law and protect the justices. And my Democrat colleagues were perfectly happy with Supreme Court justices being threatened if they disliked the rulings that were coming from the Supreme Court justices. Unlike my colleagues, I believe we should protect judges regardless of whether I agree with them or not. We should protect their safety. And every time you hear a Democrat senator talk about protecting judges from acts of violence, you ought to ask them, why did they not have a word to say about the Biden Justice Department allowing mobs to threaten the families and children of Supreme Court justices night after night after night while Biden's Attorney General refused to follow the law? And with that,
I actually distinctly remember you, Chairman, on more than once condemning those attacks on Republican-appointed jurists. To say things like that feeds just the partisanship in this institution and feeds the fiery rhetoric. And it's just plain not true. It's just plain not true. And I think you know that, but we can pull from the record from my colleagues in real time, literally days afterwards, condemning it. There's a lot of substantive things to say here, but to think that the lack of humanity when people's homes are being threatened was not in existence, I think that's unfair and really concerns me that you would say that in the way that you did.
On today's breakdown, we're focusing on a fiery Senate moment between Cory Booker and Ted Cruz. What started as a debate over judicial safety quickly turned into an all-out clash over truth, lies, and political hypocrisy. Booker didn't hold back, accusing Cruz of spreading a patent lie. Let's dig into what really happened and why this exchange speaks volumes about the battle for America's democratic values.
I would make two brief observations. Number one, it is interesting as our Democrat colleagues defend these nationwide injunctions that neither of them made any reference to the fact that the number of nationwide injunctions issued in the first 4 months is greater than the entire 20th century and is greater than all of the nationwide injunctions issued against Bush, Obama, and Biden combined, nor did they address the disturbing fact that of the 40 universal injunctions that have been issued in the last 4 months, 35 of them came from the same 5 judicial districts. There is a reason for this. Blue state attorneys general and radical leftist groups are seeking out affirmatively radical judges who they know will impose their own policy preferences. If it were simply, as our Democrat colleagues said, judges following the law, then you wouldn't have to keep going to the same radical judges over and over and over again, because judges across the board should do that. But the litigants know exactly who the zealots are that are on the bench, and that's who they are seeking out. I will also point out that the discussion about the urgency of protecting the safety of judges. Listen, I agree. We should protect the safety of every federal judge, but it is interesting because my Democrat colleagues were utterly silent during 4 years of the Biden administration when you had violent mobs outside the homes of Supreme Court justices unhappy with the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs, and the Biden Justice Department refused to enforce federal law and protect the justices. And my Democrat colleagues were perfectly happy with Supreme Court justices being threatened if they disliked the rulings that were coming from the Supreme Court justices. Unlike my colleagues, I believe we should protect judges regardless of whether I agree with them or not. We should protect their safety. And every time you hear a Democrat senator talk about protecting judges from acts of violence, you ought to ask them, why did they not have a word to say about the Biden Justice Department allowing mobs to threaten the families and children of Supreme Court justices night after night after night while Biden's Attorney General refused to follow the law? And with that,
Mr. Chairman, would you indulge me for a moment?
We indulge you every moment.
I appreciate that act of generosity. It's just something you said that I think is actually dangerous and should be addressed, and you're welcome. But when Judge Anderol was killed in New Jersey, the Republican colleagues in the Senate, their outpouring of support, their outpouring of concern, they're willing to work together on a bipartisan bill was extraordinary. It shows the truth of this institution that despite some of the fiery rhetoric that you were sowing, we're really a bipartisan, working bipartisanship. Cornyn and Coons, after the incidents you're talking about, got together and actually passed a bill to better protect our Supreme Court justices, many of whom are friends of ours. You know, Gorsuch and I disagree on a lot of stuff. I knew his wife before he did. We studied together at Oxford. This implication that there was silence when there were threats on their people's houses is absolutely absurd. I remember the rhetoric and the comments, the concern from Coons. I actually distinctly remember you, Chairman, on more than once condemning those attacks on Republican-appointed jurists. To say things like that feeds just the partisanship in this institution and feeds the fiery rhetoric. And it's just plain not true. It's just plain not true. And I think you know that, but we can pull from the record from my colleagues in real time, literally days afterwards, condemning it. There's a lot of substantive things to say here, but to think that the lack of humanity when people's homes are being threatened was not in existence, I think that's unfair and really concerns me that you would say that in the way that you did.
Well, I thank my colleague from New Jersey. I will note, as John Adams observed, that facts are stubborn things. And it is existing federal law, 18 U.S.C. Section 1507, that makes it a crime to protest at a judge's home. And the law provides whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent or of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device, or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year, or both. That is federal criminal law. Night after night after night, angry mobs were outside the Supreme Court justices' homes, and in the entire course of it, the Biden Justice Department prosecuted nobody. We had the Attorney General sitting at that table, and multiple Republican senators asked him, why are you not enforcing the law? What they are doing is a crime. And my friend from New Jersey said, it is a lie to say we, the Democrats, condone this. I would challenge, my friend, find a single Democrat senator on this committee holding the Attorney General to account for not enforcing this law. I was here at those hearings, and I do not recall a single Democrat senator saying to the Attorney General, you should arrest these people who are violating the law. You should protect the judges. I agree that there was general language against violence, but not a single Democrat senator that I ever saw in this committee was willing to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland to account for flagrantly disregarding the federal criminal law, because the Biden administration agreed with the protesters and I think wanted those justices harassed at their home.
I really appreciate that you've now shifted the accusation you made earlier. Your accusation was that we were silent in the face of protests at Supreme Court justices' homes. Again, we joined together in a bipartisan way, not only to condemn that, but to pass legislation to extend round-the-clock security protection, literally days. It was introduced May 5th, passed the Senate in a bipartisan fashion on May 9th. So if you're saying that we didn't criticize Merrick Garland—
Did the Biden DOJ arrest a single person under this law?
You are now changing the
No, that is what I said.
accusation
That is what I said.
Again, I'll pull the record.
Did the Biden DOJ arrest even one?
Again,
The answer is no.
my point to you is the accusation that the Democrats on this committee do not care about the safety
All right, so let me
of
ask you
federal
this.
judges.
Should
I
the
did not
Biden
interrupt you,
DOJ
sir. I would appreciate if you let me finish. I am sick and tired of hearing the kind of heated partisan rhetoric, which is one of the reasons why we have such divisions in this country, the attacks we see from the President of the United States of America trolling and dragging judges through is what we should be talking about that puts people in danger. I'm simply taking issue with the claim that you made at the top that people on the Democratic side of the aisle do not care about the safety and the security of judges and said nothing. You said we were silent after people's houses were protested. That is a patent lie, sir. We were not silent. We took action. We joined in a bipartisan way to protect those judges, as was done in a bipartisan way to protect a New Jersey judge after their horrific attack at their home. So I see you now trying to shift the debate to whether we talk to an attorney general. I'm simply taking issue with this accusation that somehow we Democrats are so bad because we don't call out threats to our judicial colleagues. And that is wrong. You could change the argument now that you want, but what you said was patently not true and was, in fact, a patent lie.
So I do enjoy the fact that my colleague from New Jersey raises his voice and says it's a patent lie and says he's doing so in defense of lowering the rhetoric. There is some irony to doing those two together. I'll point out that in the entire course of those remarks, Senator Booker did not dispute the central point I made, which is the Biden Justice Department arrested 0 people, prosecuted 0 people, for violating the criminal law, and every Democrat senator on this committee was silent about it. And this was an ongoing pattern for months. And I would note also that the senator from New Jersey clutched his pearls about language threatening judges, and yet I do not recall a single Democrat senator of this committee saying a word when Chuck Schumer went to the steps of the Supreme Court and threatened the safety of the Supreme Court justices by name, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and he said, "You have unleashed the whirlwind and you will pay the price." And not a single Democrat senator had a word to say about this. And so their outrage is selective. And I will give my colleague from New Jersey a chance to just answer a simple yes-no question. Should the Biden Justice Department have enforced the criminal law against protesting at a justice's home? Yes or no?
So the rank hypocrisy of Chuck Schumer apologizing the next day and you holding that standard for him and not for your president, who you actually rightfully described when you were running against him in a primary. I would love to run those tapes of how you perfectly talked about the danger of our president and his rhetoric. But now you are failing, in fact, blind to the very things you're accusing Chuck Schumer of. I don't think Donald Trump would know an apology if it hit him in the head. Never has said apologizing. So again, you are very, very, sir, very, very deep into the waters of hypocrisy in your criticisms of Chuck Schumer.
So let the record reflect that Spartacus did not answer the question and did not tell us whether the criminal law should be enforced, because he knows the answer is yes. And he knows that the Biden Department of Justice was being wildly political and partisan in refusing to enforce the law because they disagreed with the Supreme Court justices' rulings. I have also, in addition to Senator Durbin, who's given his opening statement, I have a written opening statement from Chairman Grassley without objection.
The Senate Judiciary Committee has long been a stage for sharp exchanges, but the confrontation between Senator Cory Booker and Senator Ted Cruz stood out for both its intensity and its clarity. It wasn't just a debate over policy, it was a test of honesty, integrity, and whether our leaders are willing to confront political hypocrisy head-on. Ted Cruz, in his characteristic fashion, launched into accusations against Democrats, claiming they had remained silent while protesters demonstrated outside the homes of Supreme Court justices. Cruz painted a picture of inaction and partisanship, suggesting that President Biden's Justice Department deliberately refused to enforce the law. For Cruz, this was a chance to score points, to portray Democrats as weak on judicial safety. But Cory Booker refused to let the accusation stand. With force and conviction, Booker called Cruz's statement what it was, a patent lie. That phrase echoed across the chamber, cutting through the noise. Booker reminded everyone that Democrats had not only spoken out, but had joined Republicans in passing legislation to increase protection for judges after tragic incidents, including the horrific attack on a New Jersey judge's family. In other words, Cruz's claim wasn't just wrong, it was deliberately misleading. This is where Booker's leadership shined. Rather than get tangled in Cruz's rhetorical traps, he shifted the spotlight back to the truth. Democrats acted when it mattered. They worked across party lines to strengthen judicial security. They recognized the stakes. Cruz, meanwhile, was exploiting the issue for political theater. The hypocrisy at play here cannot be ignored. Cruz, while feigning outrage over protests near justices' homes, has been silent when Donald Trump has attacked judges personally, naming them, ridiculing them, and inciting anger against them. Trump's rhetoric has created real risks for judicial officials across the country, yet Republicans like Cruz refuse to condemn it. Instead, they recycle years-old quotes from Chuck Schumer, a man who apologized, while giving Trump a free pass. Booker's retort was devastating because it reminded America of that double standard. Schumer made a fiery remark, then corrected it. Trump makes threats and insults daily without ever apologizing. One man showed accountability, the other thrives on incitement. And Republicans know the difference. They simply choose to ignore it. What we saw in this exchange was more than a partisan clash. It was a reflection of two competing visions for America. On one side, Cory Booker defended facts, accountability, and the bipartisan record of Democrats on judicial safety. On the other, Ted Cruz twisted reality to suit a narrative, one that portrays Democrats as dangerous while excusing Trump's truly dangerous behavior. Booker also captured the frustration that many Americans feel. He said plainly that he is sick and tired of the heated partisan rhetoric that fuels division and puts people at risk. He was speaking for millions of Americans who are exhausted by the endless cycle of lies and gaslighting. But unlike Cruz, Booker didn't just complain. He pointed to real actions taken to keep judges safe. That contrast could not be clearer. Cruz's fallback strategy was predictable. Press Booker with a yes or no question. Should the Justice Department have prosecuted protesters? But Booker didn't take the bait. Because this was never about a simplistic yes or no answer. It was about exposing the dishonesty of the premise. Republicans like Cruz want Democrats to play defense while they distort the facts. Booker refused, and that refusal showed strength. In the broader context, this debate underscores a dangerous reality. Threats against judges are increasing, fueled in part by reckless political rhetoric. Protecting judges is not a partisan issue. It's an American issue. And yet, Republicans treat it as another weapon to attack Democrats, all while ignoring the elephant in the room, Donald Trump's relentless campaign of intimidation. Cory Booker's confrontation with Ted Cruz will be remembered because it demonstrated what it looks like when a Democrat stands firm against lies and distortion. His willingness to call out a patent lie matters in a political climate where too often falsehoods go unchallenged. For Democrats, this should be a model. Confront dishonesty immediately, expose hypocrisy, and remind the public of the truth. This moment also highlights what's at stake in the coming political battles. Will voters reward those who twist facts for partisan gain, or will they stand with leaders who tell the truth and defend democracy? Booker's response suggests a path forward: clarity, honesty, and refusal to be dragged into bad faith debates. At its heart, the Booker-Cruz exchange was about more than words. It was about whether we will accept gaslighting as normal politics or demand accountability from those who mislead the public. Booker chose accountability. Cruz chose gaslighting. That is the difference. And for all the theatrics, the takeaway is simple. Democrats acted to protect judges. Republicans accused them of inaction while excusing Trump's dangerous attacks. Cory Booker exposed that hypocrisy, and the American people deserve to see the truth.